You're fired. You know the policy.
But he was starving.
Doesn't matter. Policy is policy.
Please, I was just helping.
Amara Nwosu stood just outside the glass doors of the supermarket, her work badge no longer clipped to her shirt. It was now in the hand of the store manager. Mr. Benro Adeyemi held the small plastic card between two fingers like it was a trophy he had just won. His lips were curved in a thin, satisfied smile. "You heard me," he said loudly so everyone could hear. "You're fired." Customers near the entrance slowed their steps. A few stopped completely. A cashier leaned slightly out from behind her register. Two security guards stood near the sliding doors, watching the scene without saying a word. Amara didn't argue. Her hands trembled, but her voice stayed quiet when she spoke earlier, and now she had nothing left to say. She had given bread and water to a hungry man. And for that, she had lost the only job keeping her family afloat. Near the entrance wall, the homeless man everyone called Baba clutched the loaf of bread in both hands. His shoulders sagged as he looked at Amara with deep regret. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Amara forced a small smile. "It's not your fault," she said softly. "Please, just eat." The words were simple, but they carried more strength than anything shouted in the parking lot. Without looking back at the manager, Amara picked up her worn handbag and stepped away from the store entrance. The afternoon sun was hot against the pavement. Cars moved slowly through the lot. People whispered as she passed. Some stared with pity. Others stared with curiosity. Amara kept walking. Her eyes burned, but she refused to cry in front of them. She reached the edge of the parking lot when a low rumble rolled through the air. At first it sounded like distant traffic. Then the sound grew louder. Heads began turning toward the road. A line of black SUVs appeared at the entrance of the lot. One. Then another. Then another. 5 vehicles moved forward in perfect formation, polished and powerful, their dark windows reflecting the afternoon light. The parking lot grew quiet. Customers stepped aside. Even the security guards straightened their posture. The convoy stopped directly in front of the supermarket entrance. Doors opened. Men in dark suits stepped out one by one, their expressions focused as their eyes moved across the surroundings. Mr. Benro's confident smile slowly faded. The back door of the lead SUV opened. A tall man stepped out. His suit was immaculate. His movements calm and controlled. But instead of looking at the store, instead of looking at the crowd, he walked straight toward Baba. The homeless man slowly raised his head. The stranger stopped in front of him. And then he lowered his head in a respectful bow. The entire parking lot froze. Mr. Benro's face drained of color. Amara stood motionless, staring in disbelief. Because in that single moment, everyone realized something extraordinary was happening. And whatever came next would change every life standing in that parking lot. The man in the tailored suit straightened slowly after the bow. Up close, his presence carried a quiet authority that made people instinctively step back. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just the kind of presence that made the air feel heavier. He looked at Baba with deep respect. "Sir," he said gently. The single word stunned everyone within earshot. "Sir." The homeless man many customers had mocked, the man security guards chased away almost every week, was being addressed with honor by someone who had just stepped out of a convoy worth more than the entire store. Baba's hands trembled slightly as he held the loaf of bread Amara had given him. For a moment he said nothing. Then his tired eyes slowly lifted to the man in front of him. Around them the parking lot had gone completely still. The store manager stood frozen near the entrance. The customers who had watched Amara lose her job minutes earlier now stared in disbelief. And Amara herself could barely move. Because something about this moment felt impossible. Why would a powerful man arrive with a convoy of security vehicles, only to bow to a homeless man holding a loaf of bread? Before anyone could understand what was happening, the narrator pauses. "Before I explain why a convoy of black SUVs just arrived for a man everyone believed was homeless, take 1 second to subscribe. Because stories like this remind us of something the world often forgets. Kindness is never wasted. And sometimes the smallest act of compassion returns in ways no one could ever imagine." Now let's go back to the beginning. Because none of this started with the convoy. It started with a young woman who refused to walk past a hungry man. To understand why a supermarket employee was fired for feeding a hungry man, and why a convoy of powerful vehicles just arrived for him, we have to go back. Back to a part of the city most people passed through without paying attention. The neighborhood was busy from morning until night. Buses stopped every few minutes along the roadside. Street vendors called out to passing customers. Mechanics worked under the shade of old umbrellas beside dusty vehicles. People hurried everywhere, chasing the next small opportunity to earn a living. In the middle of that constant movement stood a modest supermarket. It wasn't the biggest store in the city. It wasn't the most beautiful either. But it stayed busy because it served ordinary people. Office workers came during lunch breaks. Taxi drivers stopped by for quick meals. Mothers arrived in the evenings to buy groceries after long work days. The sliding doors opened and closed all day as hundreds of customers passed through. Inside, the workers moved just as quickly. Cashiers scanned items non-stop. Shelf attendants rushed to refill products. Cleaners wiped spills before someone slipped. Everyone worked hard because every shift mattered. For most of them, the job was more than a paycheck. It was survival. Among those workers was a quiet young woman who rarely attracted attention. She didn't complain loudly like some employees. She didn't argue with customers. She simply did her job every day and went home. But that quiet woman would soon become the center of a moment no one in that neighborhood would ever forget. Her name was Amara. And long before the convoy arrived, before the crowd gathered, before a powerful man bowed to a homeless stranger, Amara was simply a supermarket employee trying to hold her world together. Amara was 28 years old, but responsibility had aged her in ways the mirror could not show. She carried herself with a quiet strength that came from years of holding things together when everything else threatened to fall apart. Her father had died when she was 19. One ordinary evening he had left for work and never returned home. By the time the news reached the family, the world Amara knew had already changed. In one night the house grew heavier, quieter, and filled with questions no one could answer. Her mother tried to stay strong for the children, but grief and illness arrived together. Within a year, hospital visits became part of their routine. The woman who once filled the house with laughter now spent most days lying down, fighting pain she never fully explained. That left Amara, the eldest, the one who suddenly had to grow up faster than she was ready for. She had two younger siblings who depended on her. Kosi, her younger brother, was 17 and sharp-minded. Numbers came naturally to him, and his teachers often said he could become something great if he stayed in school. Then there was Ife, only 14, still full of dreams that had not yet been crushed by reality. She loved drawing and talked endlessly about becoming an architect someday. Amara never told them how frightened she often felt. Instead, she became the steady ground beneath their feet. She worked wherever she could at first. Small shops, temporary cleaning jobs, assisting vendors in open markets, anything that paid enough to bring food home at the end of the day. Eventually she found the job at the supermarket. The pay wasn't much, but it was steady. And steady meant everything. Amara rented a small one-room apartment not far from the bus route. The room was simple: a narrow bed against one wall, a small table, a portable stove, and a fan that sometimes worked when electricity allowed it. But inside that tiny space she carried a whole family on her shoulders. Every month she sent part of her salary home to cover her mother's medication. Every month she helped pay school expenses for Kosi and Ife. There were weeks when her own meals were smaller so theirs could remain full. But Amara never complained. Because to her, survival was not just about enduring hardship. It was about refusing to let hardship turn her into someone cold. And no matter how difficult life became, she held on to one quiet belief: kindness cost nothing. And sometimes, it was the only thing people had left to give. Every morning, Amara's day began before the sun fully rose. Her alarm rang at 5:30. Not a gentle wake-up, but the sharp buzz of a cheap phone she had owned for years. She would sit up slowly, rub the sleep from her eyes, and take a moment to breathe before the long day ahead. The small room was quiet at that hour. Outside, the neighborhood was only beginning to stir. A few distant voices. A motorcycle passing by. Somewhere nearby, a kettle boiling. Amara would wash quickly, dress in her green supermarket polo and black trousers, and tie her hair neatly back. Then she checked her phone. There was almost always a message from home. Sometimes it was Kosi telling her about a math test he had passed. Other times it was Ife sending pictures of the sketches she had drawn in her notebook. And occasionally it was her mother simply saying, "God bless you today, my daughter." Those messages mattered more than anyone could understand. They reminded Amara why she kept pushing forward. The bus ride to work took nearly 40 minutes. Every morning it was packed with other workers: drivers, cleaners, office assistants, vendors, each person carrying their own quiet battles. Amara usually stood near the window when she could. She liked watching the city wake up. Stores opening. Children walking to school. Street vendors setting up their stands. By the time the bus reached the supermarket stop, the day was already moving fast. Inside the store the routine was always the same. Shelves had to be restocked. Boxes had to be carried from the back storage room. Customers asked endless questions. Where is the cooking oil? Why is this price different? Can you check if there's more of this in the back? Amara answered politely, even when people spoke to her without patience. She moved quickly through the aisles, arranging products, lifting cartons, wiping small spills before anyone complained. Hours passed that way. Sometimes customers smiled and thanked her. But many didn't notice her at all. To them she was simply part of the store. Another employee in a green shirt. Another person making sure the shelves stayed full. But what no one saw was the quiet effort behind every shift. The tired feet. The constant worry about bills. The silent calculations in her mind as she stretched every paycheck to cover rent, transport, food, and family needs. Yet even on her most exhausting days, Amara never allowed bitterness to settle inside her. Because she believed something simple but powerful. Life had already taken enough from her. She refused to let it take her kindness too. Just outside the supermarket entrance, near the wall beside the bus stop, there was a man everyone simply called Baba. No one knew his real name. No one knew where he came from. To most customers he was nothing more than part of the street scenery. Someone you noticed for a moment and then ignored. His clothes were worn and dusty. A faded brown sweater hung loosely over his thin shoulders, and his trousers had been patched so many times that the original fabric was hard to recognize. His slippers were old and cracked from years of use. He usually sat against the wall quietly. Not begging. Not shouting. Just sitting. Sometimes he watched the traffic move along the road. Sometimes he closed his eyes as if resting. And sometimes he simply observed the steady flow of people entering and leaving the store. Customers reacted to him in different ways. Some wrinkled their noses and walked faster. Some muttered insults under their breath. Others complained loudly to the security guards. Why do you allow this man to sit here? Customers will stop coming if this place looks like a street corner. The guards often chased Baba away with sharp words. Move along. Don't sit here. But somehow, after a few hours, he always returned. Not aggressively. Not defiantly. Just quietly reclaiming the same small spot near the wall. And through all the insults, the dismissive glances, and the constant attempts to push him away, Baba never argued. He never shouted back. He never stretched out his hand to beg. He simply endured. Most people assumed that meant he had nothing left. But Amara noticed something others did not. There was a strange dignity about him. The way he sat upright. The way he nodded politely when someone greeted him. The way he never fought back even when people treated him like he didn't belong. It was small. Easy to miss. But to Amara it was clear. Baba carried himself like a man who had once lived a very different life. The first time Amara spoke to Baba, it happened almost by accident. It was a slow afternoon at the store. The rush of lunchtime customers had already passed, and the aisles were quiet for a moment. Amara had just finished arranging boxes of noodles on one of the shelves when her stomach reminded her she hadn't eaten since early morning. During her short break, she walked to the bakery section and bought the cheapest thing she could afford, a small loaf of bread and a sachet of water. She stepped outside the back entrance of the store where employees usually sat for a few minutes of rest. That was when she noticed Baba sitting near the wall again. His head was slightly lowered, his shoulders slumped more than usual. He looked tired. Not the kind of tired that disappears after a good night's sleep. The deeper kind. The kind that comes from days of hunger. Amara stared at the bread in her hands. Then she looked at Baba again. For a moment she hesitated. She didn't have much to spare. Every coin mattered in her life. But something inside her wouldn't let her ignore what she was seeing. She walked toward him. Sir, she said softly. Baba lifted his head slowly. Amara held out half of the bread. Please take this. The old man looked surprised. For a few seconds he didn't move. Then, carefully, he accepted the food with both hands, almost as if it were something precious. Thank you, he said quietly. His voice was calm and gentle. Not desperate. Not ashamed. Just grateful. Amara gave a small nod and returned to her break spot without saying much more. But something changed after that moment. The next day, when Amara arrived for work, Baba was sitting in his usual place. As she walked past him, he gave her a small respectful nod. No words. Just acknowledgement. And somehow that simple gesture made the long workday feel a little lighter. From that day forward, whenever Amara had something small to share, she did. A piece of bread. A banana. Sometimes leftover rice packed in a small bag. Nothing extravagant. Just enough to remind someone that they hadn't been forgotten. If Amara represented quiet compassion inside the supermarket, The store manager represented the complete opposite. His name was Mr. Benro Adeyemi. He was the kind of man who believed authority meant never admitting weakness. Every morning he arrived in polished shoes and neatly pressed shirts, carrying himself with the stiff confidence of someone who enjoyed reminding others that he was in charge. To customers he could appear polite when necessary. But to employees he was something very different. Mr. Benro ruled the store through intimidation. He walked through the aisles constantly, watching the workers with sharp eyes. If a shelf wasn't perfectly arranged, he complained. If a cashier slowed down for even a moment, he raised his voice. If someone paused for breath during a busy shift, he reminded them how easily their position could be replaced. The staff had learned long ago that arguing with him only made things worse. So most of them stayed quiet. But Mr. Benro had one belief he repeated more than anything else. It had become almost a slogan in the store. Whenever he saw something he disliked, he would say it loudly enough for everyone to hear. This is not a charity house. If a worker offered a small discount to help an elderly customer who came up short on money, he said it. This is not a charity house. If someone tried to give leftover food from the staff room to people waiting outside, he said it again. This is not a charity house. To him, kindness was not a virtue. It was a threat to order. And nothing irritated him more than the sight of Baba sitting near the entrance. Many times he had instructed security to chase the old man away. Customers shouldn't see that, he would complain. It makes the place look bad. But no matter how often Baba was pushed away, he always returned quietly to the same spot. And every time Mr. Benro saw him there again, his irritation grew stronger. Because in his mind, people like Baba represented failure. And failure, he believed, had no place near his store. At first, Mr. Benro did not notice what Amara was doing. The store was busy most days and he spent much of his time moving between the office and the front of the building, checking receipts, speaking with suppliers and watching employees like a hawk. But small routines rarely stay hidden forever. One afternoon he stepped outside to take a phone call. As he stood near the entrance, he noticed Amara walking toward the wall where Baba usually sat. She carried a small bag in her hand. Mr. Benro watched quietly. Amara handed the bag to the old man. Baba received it with a respectful nod. They exchanged only a few words before Amara returned to work. The moment lasted less than a minute. But it was enough. Mr. Benro's face tightened as he watched the scene. The next day he saw it again. This time it was a banana. Another day it was bread. Always something small. Always given quietly. To Amara it was simply kindness. To Mr. Benro it was something else entirely. Encouragement. Encouraging people to gather near the entrance. Encouraging behavior he believed would damage the store's image. That evening he called the security guards aside. If you see that man sitting there again, move him away immediately, he ordered. The guards nodded. But even when they chased Baba away, he returned hours later. And eventually Mr. Benro began to notice something that irritated him even more. Customers had started noticing Amara's kindness. A few of them smiled when they saw her sharing food. One woman even said, "That girl has a good heart." Those words did not impress the manager. In his mind, good hearts did not increase profit. Good hearts created problems. So he began watching Amara more closely. Waiting. Because sooner or later he believed she would make a mistake. And when that moment came, he intended to make an example of her. Before we continue, let me ask you something. Have you ever seen someone punished for doing the right thing? If you have, take a moment to subscribe. Because the lesson this story delivers will remind you why kindness always finds its way back. And in Amara's case, it was about to return in a way no one in that store could have imagined. The day everything changed began like any other Saturday. Weekends were always the busiest time at the supermarket. By late morning, the parking lot was already crowded with vehicles. Customers pushed carts through the aisles, children followed behind their parents, and the cash registers worked non-stop as items passed across the scanners. Inside the store, the workers moved quickly to keep up with the constant demand. Amara had been restocking cooking oil on one of the middle aisles when she noticed something unusual through the front glass doors. Baba was there again. But today something about him looked different. He wasn't sitting upright like he usually did. His back leaned heavily against the wall, and his head tilted forward slightly. Even from inside the store, Amara could see the exhaustion in his posture. It was the kind of weakness that came from not eating for too long. She continued working for another few minutes, trying to focus on the boxes in front of her. But her mind kept drifting back to the image outside. Finally, she placed the last bottle on the shelf and glanced toward the front entrance again. Baba had barely moved. A small knot formed in her chest. Amara knew her lunch break was still an hour away. But something told her waiting might not be the right choice. She walked quietly toward the bakery section and picked up a loaf of bread. Then she grabbed a bottle of water from the cooler. At the register, she paid with the few notes she had in her pocket. The cashier didn't ask questions. Amara stepped outside into the warm afternoon air. Baba slowly lifted his head as she approached. For a moment his eyes seemed unfocused, like he was struggling to stay alert. Amara knelt slightly and held out the bread and water. "You should eat," she said gently. The old man looked at the food as if it were something rare. Then he raised his eyes to her face. "May your kindness return to you," he said quietly. Amara smiled. She didn't know how powerful those words would soon become. Because just a few steps behind her, someone had been watching the entire moment. Amara. The voice cut through the afternoon noise like a sharp blade. She turned slowly. Mr. Benrose stood a few steps away from the store entrance, his arms folded tightly across his chest. His expression carried the same cold authority the staff had learned to fear. Several customers near the entrance paused to watch. The security guards straightened where they stood. Amara felt a knot tighten in her stomach. "Yes, sir," she said carefully. Mr. Benrose looked at the bread in Baba's hands, then back at Amara. "What exactly do you think you are doing?" he asked. Amara stood up slowly. "I bought him food," she replied quietly. "With my own money." The manager gave a short laugh that carried no humor. "You bought him food, in front of my store." "He's hungry," Amara said. "He hasn't eaten. That is not your concern." Baba lowered his eyes, gripping the bread as if he suddenly wished he could disappear. Amara glanced at him briefly before turning back to the manager. "I didn't take anything from the store," she said. "I paid for it." "That is not the point." Mr. Benrose stepped closer, his voice growing louder. "The point is that you are encouraging this man to stay here." Several customers had now gathered near the entrance. Some whispered to each other. Others simply watched the confrontation unfold. Amara tried to remain calm. "He sits here quietly," she said. "He doesn't bother anyone. That is not for you to decide." Mr. Benrose gestured sharply toward the street. "This is a place of business. Not somewhere people come to feed beggars." The words landed heavily in the air. Amara felt heat rise in her chest. She knew the safest choice was to remain silent. But something about the way he spoke, about the way he treated Baba as if he were less than human, made it impossible for her to stay quiet. "He's a person," she said softly. Mr. Benrose's eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" Amara met his gaze. "He's a person," she repeated. "And people deserve to eat." For a moment the entire entrance area fell silent. Then the manager's face hardened. Because Amara had just done something none of his employees ever dared to do. She had challenged him. Mr. Benrose stared at Amara for several long seconds. The kind of silence that follows when someone in authority has just been challenged in public. Customers near the entrance had completely stopped moving now. A woman holding a basket of groceries stood frozen beside the sliding doors. One of the cashiers leaned forward from behind her register, trying to see what would happen next. Even the security guards seemed unsure whether they should step in or simply watch. The manager finally spoke. "You seem to have forgotten where you are working," he said slowly. Amara didn't answer. Mr. Benrose pointed toward the store entrance. "This is my store," he continued. "And I will not have employees standing outside encouraging street people to gather here." "It's not your store," Amara replied quietly before she could stop herself. The words slipped out instinctively. The moment they were spoken, the air around them seemed to tighten. Mr. Benrose's eyes widened slightly. "You want to repeat that?" he asked. Amara swallowed. She hadn't planned to argue. She knew how easily someone in her position could lose everything by speaking up. But she also knew something else. She had not done anything wrong. So she remained silent. Mr. Benrose took a step closer. "Give me your ID badge," he said coldly. The command landed like a hammer. Amara's hand slowly moved to the badge clipped to the front of her shirt. Around them, people began whispering again. "You're firing her? All because she gave him food?" Amara unclipped the badge. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she forced herself to stay calm. If she cried, he would enjoy it. If she begged, he would feel justified. So instead, she held the badge out toward him without a word. Mr. Benrose snatched it from her hand. "You are finished here," he announced loudly so everyone could hear. "Effective immediately." Baba looked up suddenly, panic filling his tired eyes. "No, please," he said quietly. But the decision had already been made. Amara stood there for a moment, absorbing the weight of what had just happened. Then she turned toward Baba. "It's all right," she said softly. "Eat." And with that, she picked up her bag and began walking toward the parking lot, not knowing that within minutes, everything was about to change. Amara walked away from the entrance slowly, her steps steady even though her heart felt heavy inside her chest. Behind her, the whispers continued. Some customers shook their heads in disbelief. Others simply watched with the quiet curiosity people often show when someone else's life suddenly falls apart in public. Near the doorway, Mr. Benro stood tall, the plastic ID badge still in his hand. For him, the moment felt like a victory. One of the security guards glanced at Amara as she passed but said nothing. The other guard shifted awkwardly, as if unsure whether to feel embarrassed or relieved that he wasn't the one standing in her position. Inside the store, the sliding doors opened and closed as customers continued their shopping. Life moved forward. But for Amara, everything had just stopped. She kept walking. The hot pavement stretched ahead of her across the parking lot. Cars moved slowly in and out of the spaces, drivers unaware that someone's livelihood had just disappeared behind them. Her eyes burned. But she refused to let the tears fall here. She had worked too hard to let the last image of her in that place be one of weakness. Behind her, Baba still stood near the wall clutching the loaf of bread. The old man looked devastated. He stared at Amara as if the entire situation was somehow his fault. Amara paused for a moment and turned back slightly. Their eyes met across the distance. "It's not your fault," she said again, her voice just loud enough for him to hear. "Please, eat." Baba lowered his head slowly, holding the bread closer to his chest. Amara gave him one last reassuring nod. Then she turned again and continued toward the edge of the parking lot. Each step carried her farther away from the job she had depended on. Farther away from the income that paid her rent. Farther away from the stability her family relied on. She reached the far side of the lot and wiped quickly at her eyes. And that was when she heard it. A deep rumble. Full, powerful, and getting closer. At first, the sound blended with the usual traffic along the busy road. Engines passing. Cars slowing at the intersection. But this sound was different. Heavier. Stronger. Amara turned toward the road just as the first vehicle appeared at the entrance of the parking lot. A black SUV. Large. Immaculate. Its dark surface reflected the afternoon sun as it rolled slowly past the front gate. Then another followed behind it. And another. Within seconds, 5 identical vehicles entered the lot one after the other, moving in perfect formation. People began to notice immediately. A woman pushing a shopping cart stopped in the middle of the walkway. 2 delivery drivers paused beside their truck. Even the security guards near the entrance straightened instinctively. Convoys like this did not arrive at ordinary supermarkets. The vehicles moved calmly across the parking lot before stopping directly in front of the store entrance. Engines went quiet. Doors opened. Men stepped out. They wore dark suits, clean white shirts, and discreet earpieces. Their movements were controlled and efficient as their eyes scanned the surroundings. Customers began whispering among themselves. "Who is that for? Is someone important here?" Near the entrance, Mr. Benro watched the scene unfold with growing confusion. Moments earlier he had been celebrating his authority in front of employees and customers. Now the atmosphere around him had shifted. Something powerful had just arrived. The final SUV stopped. For a brief moment nothing happened. Then the rear door opened. A tall man stepped out. He was dressed in a dark suit that fit him perfectly, the kind worn by people accustomed to important meetings and serious decisions. His posture was calm. Confident. He looked around the parking lot once, taking in the scene. Then his eyes stopped on one person. Baba. Without hesitation, the man began walking toward him. Customers stepped aside as he passed. The security guards moved out of his path automatically. Even Mr. Benro said nothing. Everyone simply watched. Because whatever was about to happen next was clearly not ordinary. The man in the dark suit walked steadily across the parking lot. Each step carried a quiet confidence that made people instinctively move aside. The men who had stepped out of the SUVs followed a few steps behind him, keeping a respectful distance. But the man's focus was fixed on only one person. Baba. The old man still stood near the wall, clutching the loaf of bread Amara had given him. His shoulders were slightly bent, and his eyes looked uncertain as the suited stranger approached. Around them the crowd had grown larger. Customers gathered near the entrance. Cashiers peered through the glass doors. Even drivers in the parking lot remained inside their cars, watching. Mr. Benro stood just outside the sliding doors, trying to understand what he was seeing. The suited man finally stopped in front of Baba. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The parking lot fell completely silent. Then the man lowered his head. Not slightly, not casually, but in a deep, respectful bow. Gasps spread through the crowd. The security guards looked at one another in confusion. Mr. Benro's confident posture disappeared instantly. His mouth fell open, because the man who had just arrived with a convoy of luxury vehicles was bowing to the same homeless man he had spent months trying to drive away. Baba looked stunned. Slowly, he lifted his trembling hands as if unsure how to respond. "Sir, please," he murmured softly. But the man in the suit raised his head and smiled with deep emotion. "It took us a long time to find you," he said. His voice was calm but filled with relief. "We've been searching everywhere." The words echoed through the quiet parking lot. People exchanged confused looks. Searching for him? For the homeless man? Amara stood several meters away, frozen in place. She could hardly breathe, because suddenly the strange feeling she had always sensed about Baba, the quiet dignity, the calm presence, no longer seemed like imagination. It felt like the beginning of a truth no one had expected. And the man who had just bowed to him was about to reveal it. The man in the suit stepped a little closer to Baba. Up close, the emotion on his face was impossible to hide. Relief, respect, and something deeper, something that looked very much like gratitude. "Father," he said quietly. The word moved through the crowd like a sudden wave. People looked at each other in confusion. "Father?" Baba lowered his head slightly, as if the word carried memories he wasn't ready to face. "You shouldn't have come here," he said softly. The suited man shook his head. "We searched everywhere," he replied. "Every city. Every hospital. Every place we thought you might go." Behind him, the men from the convoy stood silently, watching the reunion unfold. Amara felt her heart pounding as she listened. Mr. Benro had stepped forward now, his earlier confidence completely gone. "What is going on here?" he asked cautiously. The man in the suit turned slowly toward him. His expression remained calm, but there was a firmness in his eyes now. "My name is Daniel Okoye," he said. A few people in the crowd gasped. The name was well known in business circles. Daniel Okoye was the chief executive of one of the largest investment groups in the region, a company that owned properties, factories, and shopping complexes across several cities, including the land this supermarket was standing on. Mr. Benro blinked in disbelief. You own this property?" he asked. Daniel gave a small nod. "Our company owns the entire complex." The manager's face tightened. Then Daniel turned back toward Baba. "And this man," he continued calmly, "is my father." The crowd erupted in shocked whispers. Amara covered her mouth with one hand, because suddenly the quiet dignity she had noticed all those months made perfect sense. The man everyone had dismissed as homeless. The man security guards had chased away countless times. The man who had been sitting outside this store day after day was the father of one of the most powerful businessmen in the country. The murmurs in the parking lot grew louder. People who had ignored Baba for months were now staring at him with completely different eyes. The same old sweater. The same worn trousers. The same quiet man who had sat against the wall day after day. But suddenly the crowd saw him differently. Mr. Benro looked as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet. "You're telling me," he began, struggling to form the words, "that this man is your father?" Daniel Okoye nodded calmly. "Yes." He glanced toward Baba again with a mixture of respect and concern. "My father built businesses long before I ever had the chance to run one," he said. "He created companies that supported thousands of families." The crowd listened in stunned silence. "But years ago," Daniel continued, "after my mother passed away, he chose to walk away from everything." He paused briefly. He believed he had lived too long surrounded by wealth and influence. He wanted to understand how ordinary people treated those who had nothing. Amara felt a chill move through her. Baba lowered his eyes slightly, but he did not deny the story. "So he left," Daniel said. "He lived quietly, moving from place to place, watching people." His gaze shifted slowly toward the supermarket entrance. "And in that time he learned many difficult truths." Mr. Benro shifted uncomfortably. Daniel's voice remained steady. Most people ignored him. Some in the crowd lowered their heads. Some insulted him. The manager swallowed. And some treated him as if he didn't deserve to exist. The words hung heavily in the air. Then Daniel looked directly at Amara. But one person did something different. Amara felt every eye in the parking lot suddenly turn toward her. Her heart raced. Daniel gave a small, respectful nod in her direction. For months, he said, my father told us about a young woman who never walked past him without kindness. Baba slowly raised his head. And for the first time since the convoy arrived, he smiled gently at Amara. Before we continue, let me ask you something. Have you ever seen someone punished for doing the right thing? If you have, take a moment to subscribe. Because the lesson this story delivers will remind you why kindness always finds its way back. And in Amara's case, it was about to return in a way no one in that store could have imagined. The entire parking lot turned toward Amara. Moments earlier she had been the employee who was fired in front of everyone. Now she stood at the center of a moment no one could fully understand yet. Amara felt her heart racing as Daniel Okoye walked slowly in her direction. His expression was calm, but there was a deep seriousness in his eyes. You must be Amara, he said. She nodded quietly. Yes, sir. Daniel glanced briefly toward Baba, who gave him a small approving nod. Then Daniel spoke again. My father told us about you many times, he said. He said there was one person who never treated him as if he was invisible. Amara felt her throat tighten. I didn't do anything special, she said softly. He was hungry. Baba chuckled quietly from behind them. That is exactly what makes it special, the old man said. The crowd remained silent. Daniel slowly turned his attention toward the store entrance. Mr. Benro was still standing there, his earlier confidence completely gone. The plastic ID badge he had taken from Amara was still clutched in his hand. Daniel walked toward him. The manager straightened quickly, trying to regain some composure. Mr. Okoye, he began nervously. If I had known. Daniel raised his hand slightly. You didn't know, he said calmly. That's correct. Mr. Benro forced a weak smile. There must have been some misunderstanding earlier, he continued. Our employee was violating company policy by encouraging. Daniel's expression did not change. Encouraging kindness? He asked. The manager hesitated. Well, the issue was about maintaining the image of the store. Daniel looked around the parking lot slowly. Customers were still gathered near the entrance. Employees were watching from inside the glass doors. Interesting, Daniel said. He stepped closer to Mr. Benro. You see, he continued quietly, our company has very clear values when it comes to the businesses operating on our property. Mr. Benro nodded quickly. Yes, of course. Daniel's voice remained calm. But today, he said, I witnessed a manager fire a hard-working employee. He paused briefly. Because she fed a hungry man. The silence that followed Daniel's words felt heavier than anything that had happened earlier. Mr. Benro shifted where he stood, his confident posture completely gone now. Mr. Okoye, he said quickly, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. My responsibility is to protect the reputation of this business. Allowing people to gather outside the entrance. Daniel interrupted him calmly. My father was sitting quietly. The manager hesitated. Well, yes, but... And the employee used her own money, Daniel continued. The manager swallowed. That may be true, but the situation creates a certain image for customers. Daniel looked toward the store entrance again. Customers were still watching. Some of them now looked directly at Mr. Benro with expressions of disappointment. Daniel turned back. You're concerned about image, he said. Yes, the manager replied quickly. Daniel nodded slowly. Then perhaps you should consider the image created when a loyal employee is dismissed for showing compassion. Mr. Benro's mouth opened slightly but no words came out. Daniel continued speaking in the same steady tone. Our company reviews the businesses operating on this property regularly, he said. The manager's face tightened. And your lease agreement, Daniel added, comes up for renewal in 3 months. The color drained from Mr. Benro's face. Behind Daniel, several of the suited men watched quietly. Daniel extended his hand toward the badge Mr. Benro was still holding. May I? The manager hesitated before slowly placing the ID card in Daniel's hand. Daniel walked back toward Amara. He held the badge out to her. You were fired a few minutes ago, he said gently. Amara looked at the badge, unsure how to respond. Daniel gave a small smile. But I believe that decision deserves to be reconsidered. Mr. Benro immediately stepped forward. Yes, of course, he said quickly. Amara, you may return to work immediately. The desperation in his voice was obvious. Daniel turned toward him calmly. I didn't say she would return to work under you. The words landed like a stone. The crowd stirred again. Mr. Benro's face went pale. Because suddenly he realized something terrifying. This situation was no longer under his control. Mr. Benrose stared at Daniel Okoye as if hoping he had misunderstood. I don't understand, he said quietly. Daniel's expression remained calm, but his voice carried authority now. You fired an employee without cause, he said. In front of customers. Simply because she showed compassion. The manager opened his mouth to protest, but Daniel continued. And you did it while standing on property owned by my company. Those words carried weight. Everyone standing nearby could feel it. Mr. Benrose's shoulders dropped slightly as the reality of the situation began to sink in. Daniel turned briefly to one of the men standing behind him. Please contact the leasing department, he said. I would like them to review the management agreement for this location immediately. The man nodded and stepped aside to make the call. Mr. Benrose's voice shook now. Mr. Okoye, please, there's no need for that. I can fix this situation. Daniel looked at him steadily. It's already been fixed. Then he turned back toward Amara. She still stood quietly near the edge of the parking lot, holding her bag. Everything had happened so quickly that she was still trying to process it all. Daniel walked toward her again. My father told us many stories during the months we were searching for him, he said. Baba watched them from a short distance away. Most of the stories were disappointing, Daniel continued. But one story stood out. He gestured gently toward the bread Baba still held. He told us about a young woman who shared what little she had, even when no one was watching. Amara lowered her eyes slightly. I just didn't want him to go hungry, she said. Daniel smiled. That is exactly why you deserve better than what just happened here. The crowd listened carefully. Because now it was clear something important was about to happen. Daniel took a small step back so everyone could hear him. My company owns this shopping complex, he said. Which means we also care about the kind of leadership running the businesses here. Mr. Benrose stood completely still. Because he knew exactly where this conversation was going. And he was powerless to stop it. Daniel looked calmly across the parking lot, making sure everyone could hear him clearly. Leadership, he said, is not about power. It's about character. The statement hung in the air. Employees inside the store had now gathered behind the glass doors. Several customers had remained in the parking lot, unwilling to leave while the scene continued. Daniel turned his attention back to Mr. Benrose. A business can replace products, he said. It can replace equipment. It can even replace buildings. He paused briefly. But replacing integrity is much harder. The manager said nothing. For the first time since the confrontation began, he looked small. Daniel continued. My father spent months observing the people around this store, he said. Baba gave a quiet nod in agreement. And during that time, one thing became very clear. Daniel's gaze shifted toward Amara again. The person who showed the most dignity in this entire place was the employee who was just fired. The crowd murmured in agreement. Daniel turned back to the manager. Which tells me something is wrong with the leadership here. Mr. Benrose looked down at the pavement. Daniel took a slow breath before delivering the decision. Effective immediately, our company will be requesting new management for this store. The words hit like thunder. Gasps rippled through the small crowd. Mr. Benrose's head snapped up. You can't, he began. Daniel raised a hand calmly. The leasing agreement gives us that authority, he said. The manager's shoulders dropped. The realization was final. His job, his position, his authority in this store, was over. Daniel then turned back toward Amara. You lost your job today because you chose compassion over silence, he said. Amara looked uncertain. Yes, she replied quietly. Daniel extended his hand. Then allow me to correct that mistake. The parking lot grew silent again. Because everyone sensed that the next words he spoke would change Amara's life forever. The parking lot remained silent for several seconds after Daniel's offer. Amara felt as if the ground beneath her had shifted. Sir, I think you may be overestimating me, she said carefully. Daniel shook his head. No, he replied calmly. I think I am recognizing someone who has already demonstrated the qualities leadership requires. Amara glanced toward the supermarket entrance. Employees were still watching through the glass doors. Some of them looked hopeful. Others looked stunned. Only a few minutes earlier, they had watched her lose everything. Now they were witnessing something completely different. I've never managed a store, Amara said quietly. That can be taught, Daniel answered. He gestured gently toward Baba. But character cannot be taught as easily. Baba chuckled softly. This young woman has character, he said. Daniel nodded in agreement. Over the past several months, he explained, my father told us many stories about the people he encountered. Some customers shifted closer, listening carefully. Most of those stories were disappointing, Daniel continued. Many people ignored him. Some treated him badly. Amara lowered her eyes. But one story he repeated again and again was about the employee who shared food with him without hesitation. Daniel gave her a respectful look. He said, you never asked questions. Never expected anything in return. Amara smiled faintly. He just looked like he needed help. Baba stepped forward slowly. And she never once treated me as if I was less than anyone else, the old man said. Daniel looked around the parking lot one more time. This is exactly the kind of example businesses need today, he said. He turned back to Amara. So yes, there will be training. There will be guidance. Then he gave a reassuring smile. But the most important quality is something you already have. The crowd murmured in agreement. Because everyone standing there could see it clearly now. The young woman who had been fired for kindness had just been given a completely new future. Amara stood quietly for a moment, trying to absorb everything Daniel had just said. Her mind raced through 100 questions at once. Rent. Her mother's medicine. Kosi's school fees. Ife's dreams of becoming an architect. Only minutes earlier, all of those responsibilities had felt like mountains she could no longer climb. Now something unexpected had appeared in front of her. A chance. I don't know what to say, Amara admitted. Daniel smiled gently. You don't need to say anything right now, he replied. Just understand that today's events showed us exactly the kind of person you are. Behind him, the employees who had gathered inside the store began whispering among themselves. Some of them had worked beside Amara for years. They knew how hard she worked. They knew how often she stayed late to help when the store was short-staffed. They knew how she treated customers with patience even when they were rude. One of the cashiers opened the glass door slightly. She deserves it, the woman said quietly to another employee beside her. Outside, Baba stepped closer to Amara. You gave me bread when you had very little, he said softly. Amara looked at him. I only shared what I could. Baba nodded. And now life is sharing something with you. Daniel turned toward the group of employees watching from the entrance. I believe the people working here understand exactly why this decision is being made, he said. Several heads nodded. Even customers who had witnessed the confrontation earlier began murmuring their agreement. Daniel then turned toward one of the suited men from the convoy. Please arrange a meeting with the property management team on Monday, he said. The man nodded immediately. We'll begin the transition process. Amara felt another wave of disbelief wash over her. The word transition sounded enormous. But Daniel looked back at her with reassuring calm. Don't worry, he said. You won't be facing this alone. The crowd slowly began to disperse after the conversation ended. Customers returned to their shopping carts. Employees stepped back inside the store. The normal rhythm of the afternoon gradually returned. But something had changed. The people who had witnessed the moment would remember it for a long time. Because in just a few minutes, the story of that small supermarket had transformed from a moment of cruelty into a lesson about character. Amara stood quietly near the parking lot entrance while the convoy prepared to leave. Daniel shook her hand once more. We'll speak again soon, he said. Amara nodded. Thank you. Then Daniel walked back toward the vehicles. Before he entered the SUV, Baba turned to Amara one last time. His eyes were warm with pride. You fed a hungry man, he said gently. Amara smiled. I only shared bread. Baba shook his head slowly. No, he replied. You shared dignity. Those words stayed with her long after the convoy drove away. Because sometimes the smallest decisions reveal the greatest truths about who we are. A river does not drink its own water. A tree does not eat its own fruit. And the sun does not shine only for itself. The same is true for people. The strongest individuals are not always the ones with the largest bank accounts. They are the ones who remember that kindness still matters in a world that often forgets. And on that ordinary afternoon outside a small supermarket, a young woman proved that compassion is never wasted. Sometimes it returns quietly. And sometimes, it arrives in a convoy of black SUVs. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to subscribe and share it with someone who still believes kindness makes the world better. Because stories like this remind us that doing the right thing is never a mistake. And you never know who might be watching.